And we have right now Bill Gates in a fireside chat with Shireen Bhan, Managing Editor at CNBC TV 18. Here's Bill with Shireen.
Well, greetings to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us here on what promises to be a very engaging conversation. Now, the idea of financial inclusion is not a new one. It gained currency since 2015, when at the spring meeting of the IMF and the World Bank Group, there was a commitment made to nurture the idea of universal access and take that forward by 2020. In fact, it got further support from the G20 in 2017, when measurable commitments were added in terms of the action agenda to take financial inclusion forward. It's an interesting time for the global economy as the pandemic continues to rage on, and that has widened the inequities across a whole bunch of different sectors. So this is also the time for governments and the private sector to look at ways to collaborate to ensure that we deliver on the idea of inclusion. I have a very special guest with me today, a man that I've had the privilege and the honor to speak with on several occasions in the past, Bill Gates, the co-chairman of the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation and the founder of Microsoft, here with us. Bill, many thanks for joining us here on this very special conversation. Before I talk to you about financial inclusion, let me ask you to set context of where you see economic recovery today. According to the Gates Foundation report published a few months ago, you believe that inequities across a whole different sectors will widen considerably, and that the forward movement that we've made on reducing poverty, that perhaps has not just been paused or halted, but there could be a reversal. As you look at where we are today, how worried, how concerned are you about not being able to meet the SDGs, for instance?
Well, certainly the pandemic is a huge setback on almost every SDG goal. If you look at the health systems in developing countries, they've been doing, not just in COVID, but in all disease areas, a worse job. And so mortality rates for many, many diseases have gone up quite a bit. Then we have the financial deficits, the educational deficits. And so it's a setback. But once we get the vaccines out on a broad basis, then, I'm optimistic that we will resume the growth that we had before, including things like great improvements in health systems. So, I'm not trying to be negative, but yes, we are not going to be as far along by 2030 as we would have been without the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. I'll get to the vaccines in a bit, but Bill, let's talk about financial inclusion. And as I pointed out, the world has made a significant progress in being able to universalize that idea, in providing new access points. Of course, we've seen a lot of use of technology to push that idea forward. Why is this an area of interest for the Gates Foundation specifically, and how do you believe you can add value here?
Well, we believe having the ability to save and transact is something that should be universal, and a lot of forums have adopted that goal. We won't be able to do that with traditional systems. That is, the cost of bank branches and paperwork is just too high. But fortunately, starting with countries like Kenya, and more recently with a robust system in places like India, we see that you can have digital financial inclusion. India is a great example. They did a lot of their own technology, which won't be possible for other countries. And so the role of the Gates Foundation as an advocate for those who don't have access today is to make sure there's technology and standards, including open source work that we're providing through the financial switch, which is called Mojaloop, and through the digital identity system, which is extremely valuable, not just for financial activities, but for health and voting and education, and that's called MOSIP. And for both of those projects, we're a major funder. We have a lot of great partners. And what we're going to see is a number of countries rolling out the payment switch and the identity system based on these open source technologies, and be able to catch up with what India and others have done, with huge benefits to the poorest, including government benefit programs being able to get to them in a far more efficient way than ever before, which was illustrated during the pandemic.
You're right in the need for common standards and the use of technology, and also in pointing out that it's going to be different for different countries depending on where they find themselves on both the tech curve, things like digital IDs and so on and so forth. But Bill, since there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, what is the role that you see the private sector playing in being able to collaborate with different governments to ensure that we move forward?
Well, once you have the digital money system, then there's all sorts of services and applications that can be built on top of that, whether it's helping with health or education or agriculture, giving people visibility into their financial status, giving them advice, should they take a loan, should they buy insurance, what makes sense. The phone becomes a connection for low cost interaction with those customers that doesn't require human activity that would be beyond the means of the people we're trying to get to who don't yet have these accounts. So the digital revolution, which of course was where I worked before moving full-time to the foundation, here we're trying to make sure that the developing countries have the benefit of the digital revolution, in some cases before it gets to even some of the rich countries who have legacy systems that people are so used to that the speed that they'll transition out of them won't be as fast as, say, China or India that didn't have that history. And so it's really learning what worked in China and India, and now making it easy for even smaller countries to do this, working with a lot of partners, including the World Bank, African Development Bank, many of them. So private sector will help these central banks create these systems, but moreover, the phone companies, the banks, and the entrepreneurs will build applications that use these financial capabilities.
Yeah, so the digital infrastructure will be the responsibility, or largely the responsibility, of governments, and then the private entrepreneurs can build on top of that. But Bill, let's talk about scaling up, because that is going to be the critical aspect of being able to provide universal access to finance. And one of the important issues there is rewiring or reinventing the way that legacy institutions have functioned. We saw what microfinance, for instance, did for the cause of financial inclusion. What kind of reimagination, reinvention do you foresee, or do you hope to see as far as legacy institutions is concerned? Traditional banking, for instance.
Well, many traditional banks are embracing these digital systems as a way of broadening their customer base. For a lot of traditional banking, the corporate customers, this is just an evolution that may allow some of the costs to be lower than they have been. But for the consumer side, it's a dramatic increase in the numbers, and you can, specialize in terms of what type of applications you build on top of these systems. It'll be a challenge for some of the banks if they don't adopt a strategy that connects to these systems. And, we think over the next 5 years, most of the central banks will see, okay, they can do this because the building blocks are very accessible, and there's almost a straightforward way that they can get their citizens all connected up. It's important to remember how far away we are from universal financial inclusion. I don't know if it's easy to put up. I have one animated slide that is just kind of something I look at to remind myself how far we have to go.
Mm-hmm. Let's bring up the slide if we can, the one that Bill is referring to see where we are on the curve as far as universal access to finance is concerned. Well, maybe you can talk us through that, Bill. I think there it is. It's on our screens now.
Yeah, good job. What it shows is pretty stunning, which is if you're in a high income country, 94% of adults have an account. And then as you go down to upper middle income, to lower middle income, and then finally to low income, you're going from 94% to 35%. And strangely, the government benefit programs are probably more important in the lower income countries. You know, India used to have a situation that as it would try and distribute cash out to the poorest, a lot of that would leak. That is, whoever was powerful in the village would take part of that, and the cost of distribution was very, very high. Now they've moved over, not all of them yet, but a number of those government benefit programs, and the leakage and overhead is dramatically lower. So whereas we used to talk about Kenya, and Kenya still has some things they've done very well, and the entrepreneurs in Kenya use the system very creatively. But I'd say because of the scale and the safeguards that the identity system, the Aadhaar work that India did, I'd say if people are going to study one country right now, other than China, which is kind of a special case, I'd say they should look at India because things are really exploding there, and the innovation around that system is phenomenal.
Oh, you're right about the fact that we're seeing a lot of innovation around in financial inclusion in India. But let me link the issue of innovation to regulation. And very often we have seen that regulation is unable to keep pace with innovation, Bill. So as we move forward, what's the kind of regulatory sandbox that you imagine we will need to put in place to ensure that innovation is not constrained because of the lack of regulation or perhaps too much regulation? And trust, of course, is crucial in all of this. So how do you find that balance?
Well, our approach is to involve the central bank because their desire to maintain control of their currency, to have use of local currency is very strong. And their desire to make sure that the system is still very secure is very, very important. And so we're talking about financial transactions that are attributed. That is, who the individual who's doing that transaction. You can make sure that the taxes are appropriate. You can make sure that if a transaction needs to be reversed, that it's a reversible transaction. And so getting central banks comfortable with these new approaches, as they see the success and as they see that they get this open source toolkit that has worked to track down any mistakes and make the system as reliable as what they have today. In fact, in some ways better than cash, in that they can go back and audit what's going on. And over time, as they have goals for tax collection, those can also be achieved far better with a system like this. So a lot of our time is spent with central bankers and making sure they see what the pioneers have done and saying, okay, in the next 5 years, every central bank should be able to do this. You need to connect with the other parts of government on the identity strategy, which you don't want this fragmentation, and that's this MOSIP platform. And the receptivity to that is very high. I mean, Bangladesh, Pakistan, each country is now coming and partnering either with World Bank or African Development Bank. And the cost of building these systems is not high. It's really the relationship with the government and the central bank, which are foundation because we're not trying to make money off of this. We're a neutral party. We're not a mobile company or a bank or a for-profit tech company. We're able to play a sort of fair broker role and actually help them go out and see what's going on in other countries.
You're right in pointing out that it requires this ecosystem to come together, led largely by central banks and then getting the private entrepreneurs on board. But since we're talking about central banks, Bill, and, it's this strange phenomena that we're witnessing today where global growth has slowed down considerably on account of the pandemic. We talked about the widening inequities across different sectors, and yet you have the stock market, which continues to boom across most parts of the world. How do you look at that?
Well, the macroeconomic situation in terms of risk-free interest rates, particularly in terms of real returns, this is an unprecedented situation, which causes the value of bonds and equities to be very, very high. It's as if the whole world is a bit like Japan, and we never really figured out how that was going to work out. So it's going to be very interesting, but there's no doubt the interest rates are what are driving those huge valuations on a broad basis, along with the technology sector continuing to generate high profitability.
Bill, I'm going to request you to move slightly towards the center of the frame, because I think we're only being able to see half of you.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
These things online, but one of the other important aspects that I do want to talk to you about is what this means as far as the gender gap is concerned. And while there has been some degree of progress made, I think the pandemic has further sort of widened the fissures when it comes to issues related to women and their participation in the economy, in the workforce, in the labor force. How do you link the goal for financial inclusion to the improvement of the cause of women in the workforce or women in the economy in general? What's the role that you see there?
Well, a big part of that is that that slide I showed you was a gender neutral slide. If you did that slide comparing women and men, you would see in almost every country, women having less bank accounts, and in many countries, a very dramatic difference. And so part of empowering women, particularly when you have benefit programs, it's been seen that money that goes into the woman's bank account actually ends up being used for more pro-family expenditures than if it goes into a joint or an account controlled just by the husband. Mm-hmm. And so, within the financial inclusion field, we have to look at that gender gap and say, okay, in Pakistan, it was particularly large. And so, the foundation went in, found some grantees, looked at how we could change that. It's absolutely critical because the benefits of getting the money under her control mean it's more likely to be used for nutrition and education and things that will drive that family out of poverty.
Yes, and the delinquency rates are also extremely low when it comes to loans that are given out to women, and that is something that we have seen. But Bill, linking the foundation's objective of universalizing access to healthcare services and what you hope to do on the financial inclusion side, how do you marry the two? What's the point of convergence?
Yeah, well, it's fair to say the foundation puts most of its money into health-related activities. Tools for reproductive health, safe birth, new vaccines, getting rid of malaria. That's what about 70% of our resources go to. But as we saw the plight of the poorest, we added two fairly large areas. One is this financial services work, which we have a great team of people doing that work, and we added agriculture. And we do a little bit in education. That's a key area, but one that we have finite resources, so we haven't done as much in. But financial services, because of my belief in the digital revolution and getting the benefits of that out to everyone, we've been able to hire a really top team to manage in these open source activities that allow governments to do things that they couldn't do. They'd be charged some insane amount by vendors if they were having to build these things from scratch. So it's a great use of the open source ecosystem. And we see this as complementary to the health work. So for example, if a woman who's pregnant needs to get to the hospital and the government wants to make a payment to her so that she can have that transport, say it's a birth that's been predicted to require a doctor's attention, the fact we have the financial digital rails makes that feasible. And so there really are, it's a benefit in and of itself to get these accounts into the hands of women and others, but there are actually some scenario ties back specifically to global health.
Bill, is there a specific set of targets that you've set out for the foundation and what you hope to achieve, the outcomes that you hope to meet on digital financial inclusion over the next few years?
Yeah, we have in some of the higher population countries, including Pakistan, Nigeria, Indonesia, Ethiopia, discussions with those governments about, okay, what is their view of this? How can we help them move very, very quickly? And then working with partners like World Bank and African Development Bank have almost a toolkit. So a country of any size could get the grant for the funding and just follow what should be a fairly straightforward recipe to build out the digital finance system, including cross-border transactions as well. And so we, within a 10-year time frame, we're looking at getting, to really 2/3 of everyone should have financial access.
Okay. We spoke a lot about vaccines, so I'm going to use the last few minutes of our conversation to ask you about what you make of where we find ourselves. You've got Pfizer applying for emergency use authorization. The UK is starting to vaccinate people with the Pfizer vaccine. There is a bunch of other vaccine candidates waiting to apply for emergency use and approval. How do you see the developments on the vaccine front? There are concerns that perhaps we have, the speed of science has been accelerated too far out, maybe on account of political motivations as well. How do you see what's happening on the vaccine front?
Well, I'd say the Western regulators are doing a great job. The UK regulator, MHRA, the US FDA, they've run these phase 3 trials in an incredibly professional way, looking for any side effects, looking at efficacy. And so I expect that we'll have about 6 vaccines approved by the first quarter. Hopefully we'll add AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax to the Pfizer and Moderna. Now, the Pfizer and Moderna, although they were the fastest, they're harder to scale. The manufacturing, the thermal stability, and the cost per unit is higher. And so we're working with global manufacturers, in particular with Serum Institute in India, and they've agreed, and they're already manufacturing the AstraZeneca vaccine. And in the future, there'll be an arrangement where they can also make the Novavax vaccine. And then we'll also find second sources for the Johnson & Johnson. And so a lot of the scaling will be these more classic non-mRNA vaccines. But the goal is to get these things out as much as possible within 2021. So even in the developing countries, the pandemic is over by sometime in 2022. And although, the case numbers in the short run in the US and many countries have gone up, and, it could be a tough next 4 or 5 months, this vaccine work is phenomenal. I've been working with these pharma companies. They've been doing their best. Thank goodness those vaccines will bring this pandemic to an end.
And you feel confident of that happening in 2022?
Yes, I think the rich countries, a lot of them, will see the numbers go down very dramatically in 2021 as the vaccine gets out. We need to make sure we do this in a somewhat equitable way, that it's not, how rich you are determines whether you get access to this vaccine. So that's where our foundation comes in, like on financial services. We're trying to make sure that the developing countries get access, and the partnerships we have with people like Serum and the Western vaccine manufacturers are our key strategy for getting, say you want to dose 70% of the entire world, then you need, if it's a 2-dose vaccine, 10 billion doses. So thank goodness the high volume manufacturers are stepping up and helping out with this, and that the second source agreements are coming together.
Yes, it's coming together, but there's still a long way to go. Bill, before I let you go, there's been many experiments on digital financial inclusion the world over. What, to your mind, have been some of the mistakes made, some of the challenges that we've seen that you believe require course correction as we move forward?
Well, it's mostly a very positive story. I mean, for example, the Indian identity system, there were some privacy concerns there, a few of which were legitimate, and the system was strengthened. Nanda Nilekani, who I think you also talked to, his team of people have done a great job. And those are valuable lessons as we're building these identity systems for other countries. The ability to work with even a low-cost phone, we have to make sure the user interface is decent. Some of the UI has been too complicated and hasn't worked. The coverage of the networks, we've got to get out into the rural areas. The governments have to really make sure that as they let mobile operators make profits off the urban areas, that they're either taxing or forcing across subsidies so that the coverage even out in the rural areas is extremely good. Likewise, the gender number, in some areas we weren't measuring that, now we are measuring that. So I see it as a field that's making more progress, and although the pandemic is a very negative thing, in this area, digital financial inclusion, it's gotten the governments to say, wow, we really need to fix this. What happened in the way India was able to use this, we need to be able to use it even during non-pandemic times.
Bill Gates, 2020 has been a volatile year, to say the least. And it's also been a year for reflection and introspection. So as I leave you, how would you sum up the year gone by, and what has it taught you? And what is it that you would like to reflect most on?
Well, governments are there to think ahead to bad things that might happen. In the case of pandemic, not enough was done. So, we can't forget that another pandemic will come, and we'll need to invest in being ready in that. I think that's very important. Digital things overall, whether it's remote learning or telemedicine or digital finance, were greatly advanced. So even though, the pandemic's been terrible, it has pushed for some of these innovations, including in how quickly we make vaccines. So there is a bright side, and we'll just have to take full advantage of that while not forgetting that we were not prepared, and we're going to have to invest, just like having a fire department, invest some money in an intelligent way and actually simulate what might happen and make sure that we're ready for it. So we have to be humble that we didn't do it perfectly, but also celebrate the great cooperation that generated the vaccines. And so we can get back to the global growth that is reducing extreme poverty in a fantastic way.
Well, we do hope that 2021 will certainly see the world in a better place. Bill Gates, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here at the Singapore FinTech Festival. Appreciate your thoughts and your insights. With that, we will wrap things up here on this session on building resilience and pushing forward the agenda of digital financial inclusion. Thanks very much for joining us, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
And thank you, Shireen, for the session with Bill Gates.